Hey all, what is up? Keasbey here, and today we're going to be looking at my Master Rank 1 Purrely deck profile for Master Duel. So I actually got through Diamond into Master really fast with Purrely, and it was performing so well that I was ready to profile it immediately. However, once I got into Master, I was actually really unhappy with how the deck was performing, so I took some time away from it, went back to the drawing board, reworked it, and now we've capped out at Master Rank 1, and I am very confident in sharing this deck with all of y'all. But before we get into all that, don't forget to drop this video a like and subscribe to the channel for even more. So a few things up front. First, since Purrely is fairly new to Master Duel, we're going to be explaining more about the in-archetype stuff than I did in the Flanderies Master Duel profile. If you want an even more in-depth ruling, tips, and tricks video for Purrely, however, check out the video on screen right now. Alrighty, so with that out of the way, let's get into this. We are a going first deck, and this deck is set up to just punch through interaction, starting with 3 copies of Purrely. Purrely is a level 1 with 2 effects. First, on normal or special summon, excavate the top 3 cards of your deck. You can then add 1 Purrely spell or trap from among those to your hand, then put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. 2 things about this effect. First, it has no once per turn attached to it whatsoever, so as many Purrely as you can summon, you can use the effect. Next, and this is more of a funny note, since the add to hand is optional, you can activate this under Droll, you just can't add a card to your hand afterwards, but if you ever need to force a Light and Darkness Dragon negate, well, there you go. Next, Purrely has an ignition effect to reveal a Purrely quick play in your hand, then overlay into the appropriate Xyz monster using both Purrely and the revealed quick play as material. Okay, so let's talk a few things about this first. First off, this is a soft once per turn, so every individual Purrely that you summon can use this effect if you have additional quick plays in hand. Next, the appropriate Xyz monster is the Xyz monster that includes the quick play spell's name in its effect. This will make more sense once we talk about those later. Lastly, since this reveal and summon happens on resolution, your opponent actually has to respond to this before they know which Xyz you are attempting to summon. However, it also means that if you had 2 separately named quick plays in hand, activate Purrely and your opponent causes you to discard one of those 2 quick plays, you do still have to Xyz summon with the remaining quick play if the proper Xyz monster for it is there, even if that's the one that you did not intend to go into on the time of activation. So that's it for Purrely. Let's look at Purrely's goth sister, Purrely. We're on 3 copies of her. She makes this deck work. On normal or special summon, add any 1 Purrely card except a quick play from your deck to your hand. This, as well as her next effect, are both hard once per turns. Keep that in mind when structuring out your plays. Next, on ignition effects, she can target a Purrely quick play in your graveyard, Xyz summon into the appropriate Xyz monster, using both Lily and the quick play as material. So this is really strong since it gives you more extension to your plays, considering that every Purrely quick play is basically emergency teleport. However, it is a bit more fragile in that, aside from being a hard once per turn as previously mentioned, because it targets, it does telegraph your future plays a bit, as well as offering your opponent 2 different avenues of interaction. One by interacting with Lily directly, and the other one by interacting with the targeted quick play. So again, just bear that in mind when you structure out your plays. Absolutely a mandatory 3 of. That's it for the main deck monsters. Let's talk hand traps. We're on 3 copies of the Bug, Maximum C. Triple copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, just generically strong and pretty universally active. Skipping ahead, we're on triple copies of Infinite Impermanence. We are planning to go first, and Imperm is just generically really strong going first or second. Something worth mentioning on Infinite Impermanence versus Effect Veiler or any other hand trap that you can activate directly from your hand in this deck specifically. Part of our game plan involves drawing a lot of cards during our opponent's standby phase, and as strong as Infinite Impermanence is, it's pretty dead if we draw it during our opponent's standby phase while we have a field set up. You could also consider Effect Veiler or even Ghost Ogre here as well, but I personally lean towards Infinite Impermanence since I think when you do go second, it gives you a lot more flexibility. Plus, if you open it and are going first, you can always set it and use it as a column negate as well as a monster negate potentially. Closing out the hand traps, we're on triple copies of Nibiru. So kind of a contentious choice sometimes, given that most decks can spit out a negation by summon number 5, but Nibiru does become significantly stronger in combination with either our Ash or Infinite Impermanence, which we can find even faster via Max C. Something else worth noting is that if you do set up with a Noir, Nibiru can be follow-up if you burn through all of your Noir interactions and your opponent can keep going, or if they clear the Noir with a Kaiju, it does drop the summon count for Nibiru from 5 down to 4. It has been working really well across the board, plus you can force your opponent to have a defense position monster on your turn that Purrely Happiness can attack into to get your plays rolling. That's it for the monsters. Let's talk about spells and traps, kicking it off with the Purrely Quick Play suite of spells. So all of these share the same structure. First, they have their own unique effect. Next, they have the effect that they grant a Purrely Xyz monster while they are a material under it. And lastly, they all have a modular effect that, as part of the resolution of their unique effect, you can discard a card from your hand to special summon a level 1 Purrely monster from your deck. So let's unpack the last part of that first because it is the most loaded. First off, the bad news. Because at the time of activation, the possibility of this card special summoning from the deck does always exist, these can all be hit with Ash Blossom. The silver lining there is, however, that the discard is not a cost, rather part of the effect. Therefore, if your opponent does hit this with Ash Blossom, you will never have to discard. Okay, let's unpack the granted effects that they give an Xyz monster. So these effects all stack, quote unquote, in that multiple copies of the same quick play will grant multiple instances of the same effect. Happy Memory is a little bit weird with this conceptually, but we'll get to that later on. Just keep that in mind when we talk specifically about Pretty and Sleepy Memory. And lastly, and most importantly, none of these are once per turn in any way whatsoever. Okay, with all those shared rulings and mechanics out of the way, let's talk about the best starter quick play we have, triple copies of Purrely Sleepy Memory. So these are all mandatory 3-ofs at the moment. Delicious is actually limited in the TCG, and the deck does function remarkably well regardless, but we also have an additional Xyz monster that helps smooth the bridge to Noir very well. Sleepy Memory is the ideal starter, as its unique effect is that the next damage you take this turn is reduced to 0, so no field presence is required to activate it. When used as a material for a Purrely Xyz monster, it grants the effect that during your opponent's standby phase, you can draw a card. So now we are going to use this as the explanation for the quote-unquote stacking. Again, air quotes around that. If you have a Purrely Xyz with 2 Sleepy Memories attached, it is not an effect that says draw 2 cards. It's actually 2 separate effects that both say draw 1 card. This means that, for example, if your opponent ashes your Purrely Xyz, they're only negating 1 instance of this effect, so you will still be able to draw a card again. Additionally, because these are all soft ones per turns, if you were to overlay into a new Xyz monster during your opponent's standby phase with this theoretical monster, you would actually get 2 fresh instances of that draw 1 effect, letting you potentially draw up to 6 cards in your opponent's standby phase. In theory, in the mirror, you could do even more, but that has only come up once in the TCG. We actually managed to draw 8 cards on our opponent's turn. And lastly, the aforementioned summon effect. I won't mention it again, just remember that the next 3 cards all have it as well. Following that up, 3 copies of Pretty Memory. The second best starter, both players gain 1,000 life points. Not as ideal as Sleepy Memory due to the life point gain for your opponent, but we like that it can be used in an empty board. The reason, by the way, that I'm emphasizing that Sleepy and Pretty Memory are the best openers is that a way that we can play around Droll and Lockbird is by doing as many of our plays as possible in the draw phase, since Droll cannot be used there. Pretty Memory's granted effect is that you can send a card you control to the graveyard as cost, then target a card your opponent controls and attach it to said Purrely Xyz monster as a material. Again, like with Sleepy Memory, this is a soft once per turn, and multiple copies under the same Xyz monster grant additional soft once per turn instances of this effect. It's remarkably strong once you've chewed through interaction to start clearing a board with non-destructive removal. That also adds to your material count as well. Next up, triple copies of Happy Memory. So this and the next one do require something to be on either side of the field in order to be able to activate them. Happy Memory prevents a card of your choice from being destroyed by a card effect the next time that it would be destroyed until the end of the next turn. This effect does not target, which has come up before. Its granted effect says that the monster it is used as a material for can attack monsters a number of times equal to the amount of Happy Memories attached plus 1. So yeah, while these do stack, if you had 2 for example, it is still just 3 attacks on monsters, since it is just 2 separate effects saying this monster can attack 3 times on monsters. Also, this card cannot attack directly if it has attacked a monster already, and if you have already attacked directly and then a monster hit the field, you cannot then attack that monster afterwards. Keep this multi-attack in mind, as it is part of this deck's pretty easy to accomplish OTK line. Next up, and it feels so great to be able to say this again, triple copies of Delicious Memory. While this is the worst one for starting plays, it's actually the most important quick play for both setting up our towers, Xperling Noir, or for OTKing with Purrely Happiness. Delicious Memory allows you to choose a monster on the field, and that monster cannot be destroyed by battle until the end of the next turn. So first, this, like Happy Memory, does not target. Again, this has absolutely come up before. Next, it is blanket protection, not a the next time. And lastly, we can force battle protection onto our opponent's monsters with this, meaning that if you have something with Happy Memory, you can get repeated attacks in. More on that when we talk about Purrely Happiness. The granted effect to an Xyz monster is a 300 attack and defense boost per material. Again, 2 copies of this creates 2 instances of this boost, but you can just consider that a 600 boost per material, since these are continuous effects and there isn't any way to really interact with one instance of it without the other. So that's it for the quick play. Let's talk about the continuous spell, My Friend Purrely. My Friend Purrely has an ignition effect that allows you to pay 500 life points, reveal 3 Purrely cards except itself from the deck, and your opponent randomly adds one of them to your hand. Very important, there is nothing stopping you from revealing 3 of the same card and randomly getting one of those. And since all 3 of our quick plays are currently at 3, turn 1, this essentially can give you access to any quick play that you could need. Next, if a Purrely Xyz monster leaves the field due to an opponent's card, you can add up to 3 differently named Purrely quick plays from your graveyard to your hand. I'm going to skim over some of the specifics about this effect here for time reasons, but again, check out the rulings video on the playlist for more info about that effect. But I will mention here that it does not target said quick plays. Both of these effects are hard once per turn, however, the activation of this card itself is not, so if your opponent messes up and shotguns removing it before you use the reveal effect, you can just activate a second copy and proceed to activate that effect. Next up, 2 copies of Purrely Stray Street. Stray Street's first effect is that your opponent cannot target your Purrely monsters the turn that they are special summoned. Keep that in mind for when we talk about the trap and Xperling Noir, but it is generally very helpful. Next, during the end phase, you can target a Purrely monster on the field, attach a quick play to it from your deck or graveyard. Keep in mind you can actually attach to your opponent's Purrely Xyzs in the mirror. In theory, it could be a very roundabout way to get a quick play you want out of the deck if you have removal for the Xyz monster and don't have an Xyz monster of your own, so just keep that in mind, but generally you do not want to do this. Also, it is a soft once per turn, but that has literally never come up before, but I suppose if you wanted to be cheeky with Metaverse, the possibility does exist there. And lastly, if a Purrely Xyz monster you control leaves the field because of an opponent's card, special summon a level 1 Purrely monster from your deck or graveyard. This is actually mandatory, so if you have this and My Friend Purrely, it will always be Chainlink 1, and My Friend Purrely will be Chainlink 2. Skipping ahead, 1 copy of Purrely Yeep. I'm actually kind of considering 2 of this, though I never did that in the TCG, so I don't think we have to here. Purrely Yeep targets a Purrely Xyz monster you control, and Xyz summons a Purrely Xyz monster of a different rank on top of it, using everything else as a material. Preview of what's ahead, Purrely Xyz monsters are all rank 2s or 7s. Generally, you're using this to rank up from a 2 to a 7 to reset Sleepy Memory's draw effect and get more draws, but it can come up for OTKs as well, letting you toggle between Purrely's mid-battle phase, or even for dodging interactions. It's just a really solid card in general. While it's in the graveyard, you can banish it to target 3 Purrely monsters in your graveyard, main, or extra deck, and shuffle them back into the deck. This comes up a lot for dodging Call by the Grave, funny enough, but it is also really good for resetting your in-deck resources. You can only activate 1 Purrely Yeep per turn, but we're only playing 1 anyway. Okay, so that does it for the Purrely stuff. Next up is 2 Book of Moons. So this is actually a newer addition to the TCG version of this deck that I play, but I've liked it a lot here too as well. It is absurd in the mirror, letting you blank your opponent's Purrely Yeep during your standby phase. You do kind of have to let them draw a couple of cards, but it's better than them drawing the same amount of cards and getting an Xperling Noir on top of that. Just a great go first or second modular card. Something that I do want to mention as a very specific interaction, and again preview for later, Xperling Noir has protection from your opponent's activated effects so long as she has 5 or more materials. However, to get her spin effect, you have to detach materials from her, and that can drop her under the 5 material threshold, letting her be interacted with. If your opponent then negates her and you still have materials, you can, in a single chain, fire off all the remaining instances of her effect and then end the chain with Book of Moon, flipping her face down so that the remaining instances of her effect will resolve properly. And finally, to close out the main deck, we're on double copies of Called by the Grave and one copy of Crossout Designator. Alright, let's dig into the extra deck. We're going to start with the rank 2 Purrely Effects monsters. Again, if you want a much more in-depth video about all the rulings, tips, and tricks for these, we do cover all of it very in-depth in the ruling video I mentioned at the top of this video. So all the Purrely rank 2s share a common setup to their effects. They have a unique effect unto themselves, an effect that allows them to thrice per turn when a Purrely quick play is activated to attach it as a material, emphasis on the when there, more on that in a moment, and an effect that occurs when said quick play is attached. So looking at part 2 of the effect, so the attachment effect must directly follow the activation of the quick plays as the next chain link or it will miss timing. So any interaction from your opponent will prevent you from attaching a quick play as a material in this way. This is really important to remember if you are trying to attempt the Purrely Happiness OTK, as it requires multiple successful attachments. Next, the effect that happens on attachment occurs on the same resolving chain link as the attachment itself. So using Purrely Beauty as an example, when it attaches a quick play as a material, you can change the battle position of a monster your opponent controls. So the way this would play out would be chain link 1, the quick play, then your opponent declines to respond, chain link 2, Purrely Beauty's effect to attach. Now as the chain begins to resolve, chain link 2 is both the quick play attaching, then the battle position swap. Then chain link 1 will resolve. This also means that since the choice of monster happens on resolution, not activation, that none of these on attachment effects target, which is remarkably relevant. Lastly, they all share one condition that modifies their unique effect if they have their corresponding quick plays attached as a material. This is where the quick play names appear in these effects, as referenced earlier. Speaking of Purrely Beauty, let's start off with her. Her unique effect is that you can target a monster your opponent controls and negate its effect until the end of the turn. This is a soft once per turn, and if Pretty Memory is attached as a material, it is a quick effect. She is very useful for potentially forcing interactions if your opponent is hard holding something for a bigger play. Her on attachment effect, as previously mentioned, is a non-targeted battle position shift of a monster on your opponent's field. Just a quick note that I haven't mentioned ever before, this can actually flip a face-down defense position monster into face-up attack position. Next up, Purrely Plump, arguably the most important Purrely at the moment. Plump's unique effect is to target up to 2 spells and traps in either graveyard and attach them as material to herself. This makes the climb to Xperling Noir significantly easier and allows you to discard spells and traps from your hand and still get utility from them as you summon additional Pearlies. Again, this is a soft once per turn and becomes a quick effect if Delicious Memory is attached to her as a material. Her on attachment effect is a non-targeted banish of a monster on the field until the end of the turn, remarkably strong. Also worth mentioning is that in the mirror match, you can use Purrely Plump to steal your opponent's Purrely quick plays from their graveyard before they can get any utility out of them. Next up, Purrely Happiness. Happiness is my personal favorite and enables a very strong OTK. Happiness also breaks the mold a little bit in that its unique effect is a trigger effect and not an ignition like the other two. When Purrely Happiness battles, after damage calculation, you can add any Purrely card from your deck to your hand. Then if Happy Memory is attached as a material, you can non-targeting half the attack of any monster on the field. Keep all of this in mind, we'll explain the OTK in just a moment. Happiness's on attachment effect is a non-targeted bounce of a spell or trap your opponent controls to their hand. Okay, so the Purrely Happiness OTK. Please keep in mind that there are a bunch of different setups for this overall, but we are going to keep it simple here. You need Purrely Happiness, Purrely Delicious Memory, and an opponent's monster in attack position. The attack max for this to work in this most basic setup is 2400, but again, there are ways to do this with more setup if your opponent's monster is even stronger than that. Additionally, if you have enough, you can even do this if all your opponent has is a defense position monster via Purrely Beauty's help as well. Again, the more resources you have, the easier this becomes. Okay, so starting this off, the first thing you are going to do is summon Purrely Happiness. Next, you are going to activate your Purrely Delicious Memory and use Happiness's effect to attach it as a material. It will now be up to 2900 attack. On resolution of Delicious Memory, you are going to force battle protection on your opponent's attack position monster. jump into the battle phase and attack into that monster and trigger Purrely Happiness's effect. You're going to grab a second copy of Delicious Memory here, and then from there, have the attack of your opponent's monster. Now you're going to activate that second Purrely Delicious Memory and again attach it to your Purrely Happiness. This will shoot it up to 4400 attack now. And then from there, you will use your second Purrely Happiness attack. Remember, we have that first happy memory under it to get that additional attack to slam into that further weakened monster. Purrely Happiness will trigger again. This time you are going to grab the second copy of Purrely Happy Memory and have your opponent's monster's attack one more time. You're going to fire off the happy memory and then attach it to Purrely Happiness, granting her an additional attack and boosting her attack up to 5000. You're going to slam it again, and this attack will be game, again provided that your opponent had a max of 2400 attack points on their monster to start with. Again, this is not the only way to set this up, just the simplest / bare minimum. You can also do this by repeatedly grabbing happy memories after the one delicious memory as well, which will just grant you one additional attack down the line. Also worth noting that if you don't win here, you will have one additional search on that last attack, and an Purrely with 5 materials on it afterwards. Alright, that's it for the rank 2s. Let's talk about the rank 7. We are on 2 copies of Xperling Noir. So Xperling Noir is either made with 2 level 7s or a rank 2 with 5 or more materials. This can actually be any rank 2, not just a Purrely, but that has never actually been relevant in any game that I've ever played. Xperling Noir's effect is to detach 2 materials, target a card on your opponent's field or in their graveyard, and spin it to the bottom of your opponent's deck. This is not once per turn at all, nor is it even once per chain. This is treated as a quick effect if Xperling Noir has a level 1 Purrely monster as a material, so make sure you leave that one attached. Next, if Noir has 5 or more materials under her, she is unaffected by your opponent's activated effects. So more on that in that rulings video I keep mentioning throughout this video, but basically this means that while she can be targeted, she is unaffected by a great deal of interactions, such as Infinite Impermanence. Again, it can target her, it just won't do anything to her. Dark Ruler no more, Raigeki, etc. She is the end goal for our board and an absolutely insane piece of interaction, especially considering that she will also have all the granted effects of any Purrely Quick Play under her as well, in addition to her native effects. Again, just to mention it here because I haven't in any previous videos, if you have the Book of Moon set and drop below that 5 material threshold and she gets negated, you can still fire off the remaining materials since she isn't once per chain, then cap off that chain with Book of Moon so that she gets flipped face down before she resolves. Alright, next we're on some other XCs. First off, we've got 1 copy of Downer Magician and 1 copy of Zeus, which I will pronounce even worse every time that it's pointed out that it is being pronounced wrong. This deck does spit these out with remarkably little effort. Following that up, we're on 1 copy of Sylvan Princess Sprite. If you get to overextend and need to gamble for an additional quick play, her effect allows you to detach a material to execute the top card of your deck, and if it is a spell or trap, add it to your hand, otherwise send it to the graveyard. She also has 1800 attack, so she can act as a decent emergency bridge to Zeus as well if need be. Next up, 1 copy of Ensemble Robin. 2 or more level 1s. When your opponent special summons a monster or monsters, target one of them and bounce it back to the hand. And now for the links. First off, 1 copy of Relinquished Anima. Anima is really strong if your opponent doesn't pay attention to monster placement, allowing you to potentially force an interaction early. Next up, Skystriker Ace Azalea. On summon, you can target a card your opponent controls, destroy it, and then if you have 3 or less spells in the graveyard, send her to the graveyard as well. Then, when she battles, once per turn before damage calculation, you can banish a spell from your graveyard to destroy the monster that she is battling. And lastly, 1 copy of Lingaribo. So I might be cutting this, same in the TCG as well. Basically, it's for outing Nightmare Corruptor Ibli by giving us something we can immediately link it off into, alongside giving us a trap negation as well. It hasn't actually come up once yet in Master Duel, and I think has maybe come up once or twice in the TCG, so I may switch it out for a copy of Protector of the Agent's Moon, which tributes a fairy for cost, including itself, to target a card on the field and destroy it, which can be an out to skill drain. There are a few other cards that I'm considering as well, one of them being Kikinagashi Fucho, which is just a very easy route to a AA Zeus. I'm also kind of considering running IP Masquerena alongside a Nightmare Unicorn, which would replace Lingaribo and probably Sylvan Princess Sprite, as it's just a good way to get a little bit of extra interaction. Plus, IP Masquerena can be used if you have to end on something like an Purrely Beauty to get the beauty off the field before it can be negated or Book of Moon or something like that, giving you a little bit of extra use for it. So that is going to be it for the deck. Again, I know this video got delayed a little bit, but I really did not feel confident sharing the list that I was initially playing. It got through Diamond really well, but once I got to Master, it really just was not performing in a way that I felt good about sharing the deck with all of you. This one, however, got me to Master 1 in probably 6 or 7 hours from a flat Master 5, so I'm feeling pretty good about sharing it with all of y'all. Don't forget, check out the rulings video that I mentioned if you want to get more information about any of these cards or any specific rulings about them, or just drop a question on this one and I'll do my best to get around to answer it. And if you do want a preview of where this deck is going to eventually go, check out my TCG list as well. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop it a like and subscribe to the channel for even more, and I will catch y'all later.